They expected screams and panic when they cornered the quiet new girl at the edge of the diving board, planning to push her into the deep end as their twisted idea of a welcome party. What Brittany Parker and her crew didn't realize was that Maya Chen had spent the last 5 years conditioning her body and mind in one of the most brutal combat sports in the world, and her uncle's voice echoing in her head every training session reminded her that true warriors protect others, they don't destroy them. What happened next didn't just shock everyone who witnessed it, it completely rewrote the power dynamics at Riverside High School and proved that sometimes the quietest people carry the strongest hearts. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The California sun blazed down on Riverside High School's sprawling campus, its rays reflecting off the glass panels of the modern athletic complex that housed the crown jewel of the school's facilities. An Olympic-sized indoor pool where chlorine-scented air mixed with the echoes of splashing water and competitive shouts. Ocean View was the kind of coastal suburb where real estate prices climbed steadily upward, along with parental expectations. And nowhere were those pressures more visible than in the hallways of Riverside High, where designer backpacks and the latest smartphones served as social currency among teenagers navigating the complex hierarchies of adolescent life. The school's population of nearly 2,000 students created a diverse ecosystem of cliques, clubs, and social strata that shifted like ocean tides depending on the season and the latest drama. At the top of this carefully constructed pyramid sat the athletes, particularly the swimmers, who had brought home 3 consecutive state championships and whose photos lined the trophy case near the main entrance. Their success had earned them privileges that extended far beyond the pool deck, from premium parking spots to preferential treatment from teachers who understood that athletic scholarships could determine entire futures. Maya Chen had arrived at Riverside High on a Tuesday morning in late September, her family's 3rd move in 4 years due to her father's consulting work that required constant relocation. At 17, she had perfected the art of being invisible during those crucial first weeks at a new school, understanding that drawing attention too early often meant becoming a target for students looking to establish dominance over fresh faces. Her strategy was simple: observe the social landscape, identify the key players, and find a safe path through the maze of teenage politics until she could establish genuine friendships based on shared interests rather than survival instincts. The move to Ocean View had been particularly difficult because it meant leaving behind Uncle Tommy's gym in San Diego, where she had spent countless hours over the past 5 years, learning not just the devastating techniques of Muay Thai, but the mental discipline that separated true martial artists from simple fighters. Uncle Tommy Chin had been a professional fighter in Thailand during his 20s, earning the nickname Silent Thunder for his ability to end fights with explosive combinations that seemed to come from nowhere. When Maya's parents had asked him to help their daughter build confidence after a series of bullying incidents at her elementary school, he had agreed with one condition: she would learn not just how to fight, but when not to fight. The lessons had been grueling and transformative, pushing Maya's body to its limits while simultaneously teaching her about respect, humility, and the responsibility that came with possessing skills that could seriously harm another person. Uncle Tommy's philosophy was simple but profound. The strongest person in any room was usually the one who could do the most damage but chose not to, and real victory came from protecting others rather than proving superiority. These concepts had been reinforced through thousands of hours of training, meditation, and philosophical discussions that had shaped Maya into someone who understood that physical power meant nothing without moral character. At Riverside High, Maya's careful observations during her first 3 weeks had revealed the standard social architecture she had encountered at every school. The swimmers dominated the top tier, led by Brittany Parker, a senior whose combination of athletic talent, family wealth, and strategic cruelty had earned her a following that extended throughout the school. Brittany's parents owned the most successful real estate agency in Ocean View, and their daughter had inherited both their business acumen and their understanding that perception often mattered more than reality in achieving desired outcomes. Madison Torres served as Brittany's primary lieutenant, a junior whose own swimming abilities were overshadowed by her leaders, but who compensated through unwavering loyalty and a talent for identifying potential threats to their group's status. Ashley Kim completed their core trio, a sophomore who had learned that staying close to power meant safety, even when it required participating in activities that made her uncomfortable. Together, they had created an atmosphere around the pool complex that discouraged competition and dissent through a combination of social pressure and strategic humiliation. The pool itself was a testament to the community's priorities, a facility that rivaled many colleges with its 8 lanes, diving boards at multiple heights, and bleacher seating for several hundred spectators. The space served multiple functions throughout the day, hosting PE classes, competitive practices, and informal gatherings where social dynamics played out as intensely as any athletic competition. The pool deck featured modern timing equipment, storage areas for various gear, and large windows that provided natural light while allowing visibility from the adjoining hallways. Maya had initially hoped to avoid the aquatic center entirely, knowing from experience that pools often became stages for the kind of dramatic confrontations that she preferred to sidestep. Her plan had been working perfectly until a required PE swimming unit forced her into the water during her 4th week at Riverside High, where years of conditioning and natural athleticism had made it impossible to hide her abilities completely. Despite her efforts to swim at a moderate pace and avoid attention, Coach Williams had noticed her technique and endurance, commenting loudly enough for other students to hear about her potential for the swim team. That single moment of recognition had shifted Maya from invisible newcomer to potential threat in Brittany's carefully calculated worldview, setting in motion a series of events that would test everything Uncle Tommy had taught her about strength, character, and the choice between reaction and response. Riverside High School's athletic complex operated on an unspoken but rigid schedule that reflected the social hierarchies governing student life throughout the campus. The swimming pool, with its pristine blue tiles and state-of-the-art filtration system, served as more than just a venue for competitive athletics and physical education classes. It had become a theater where reputations were built and destroyed, where the careful choreography of teenage social dynamics played out under the harsh fluorescent lights and the watchful eyes of students who understood that proximity to power required constant attention to shifting allegiances and unwritten rules. The morning routine began at 6:30 when the varsity swim team claimed their territory for practice, their presence announcing to anyone within earshot that this space belonged to the elite. Brittany Parker's arrival each day was timed to perfection, her luxury car pulling into the parking spot closest to the athletic entrance precisely 15 minutes before practice officially began. This timing allowed her to greet teammates, review any social intelligence gathered since the previous afternoon, and most importantly, establish.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Presence before Coach Williams emerged from his office with the day's training agenda. The pool deck during these early hours buzzed with controlled energy as swimmers stretched, adjusted their gear, and engaged in the subtle negotiations that determined lane assignments, relay positions, and the countless other details that could impact both athletic performance and social standing. Brittany moved through these interactions with the confidence of someone who had never questioned her right to lead, offering encouragement to allies, strategic indifference to potential rivals, and careful attention to any new developments that might threaten the carefully constructed ecosystem she had spent 3 years building. Madison Torres typically arrived moments after Brittany, her timing calculated to demonstrate loyalty without appearing desperate for approval. Madison's role within the group required a delicate balance between supporting Brittany's leadership and maintaining her own credibility as a serious athlete. She had learned to read the subtle signals that indicated when to speak up, when to remain silent, and when to take initiative in handling situations that required a more direct approach than Brittany preferred to employ personally. Ashley Kim's position was more precarious, her continued membership in the inner circle dependent on her willingness to execute the less pleasant aspects of maintaining group dominance. As the youngest member of their trio, Ashley had initially been flattered by the attention from older, more popular students, but the reality of her role had proven more complicated than she had anticipated. The tasks assigned to her often crossed lines that made her uncomfortable, yet the alternative of returning to social obscurity felt even worse than the moral compromises required to maintain her current status. Coach Williams presided over this complex social network with the practical understanding of someone who had spent 15 years managing teenage athletes whose emotional volatility could impact both individual performance and team chemistry. A former college swimmer himself, he recognized the signs of interpersonal conflict before they reached the point of affecting practice quality or competitive results. His approach emphasized clear expectations, consistent consequences, and the understanding that athletic success required both physical preparation and mental discipline. The coach's office overlooked the pool deck through floor-to-ceiling windows that allowed him to monitor activities even when engaged in administrative tasks or meetings with individual athletes. His presence served as both authority figure and safety net, though the students had learned to navigate the boundaries of his attention with remarkable precision. Conversations that might draw unwanted scrutiny were conducted in locker rooms or hallways, while public interactions maintained the appearance of teamwork and mutual support that adults expected to see. The pool complex itself reflected the community's investment in athletic excellence, with facilities that attracted recruiting visits from college coaches and hosted regional competitions that brought recognition to both the school and the broader Ocean View area. The main pool featured electronic timing systems, underwater viewing windows, and spectator seating that accommodated several hundred people during major meets. Adjacent diving wells provided space for advanced training, while a smaller instructional pool served beginning swimmers and rehabilitation purposes. During regular school hours, the space transformed from elite training facility to educational venue, accommodating physical education classes that brought together students from across the social spectrum. These mandatory swimming units created opportunities for interactions that might never occur in other settings, as academic tracking, extracurricular commitments, and social preferences typically kept different groups separated throughout the day. For 45 minutes at a time, chess club members found themselves sharing pool space with football players, theater enthusiasts with student government leaders, creating a democratic environment that sometimes challenged established hierarchies. Maya had recognized immediately that these PE swimming classes represented both opportunity and danger. The requirement to change into swimwear eliminated many of the visual markers that typically signaled social status, while the physical nature of swimming made it difficult to hide athletic ability or lack thereof. Students who dominated through verbal wit or fashion sense found themselves on equal footing with classmates whose strengths lay in physical capability, creating temporary shifts in power dynamics that could have lasting implications. The pool's design encouraged observation and comparison, with its open layout making it impossible for any swimmer to remain completely unnoticed during class activities. Coach Williams structured his lessons to accommodate varying skill levels, but the side-by-side nature of swimming made relative abilities obvious to everyone present. Students who struggled with basic techniques found themselves exposed to potential ridicule, while those who excelled, despite lacking official team membership, sometimes drew unwanted attention from established athletes protective of their territory. The locker rooms adjacent to the pool had become crucial spaces for the social engineering that determined who belonged where in the complex hierarchy surrounding aquatic athletics. Conversations in these areas often carried more weight than formal team meetings, as students negotiated alliances, shared information, and planned the subtle campaigns that could elevate or destroy reputations. The physical layout of the changing areas, with their maze of lockers and limited supervision, provided privacy for discussions that would have been impossible in more public spaces. Water itself served as both equalizer and revealer, stripping away pretenses, while simultaneously exposing vulnerabilities that remained hidden in other contexts. Students who projected confidence in hallways sometimes revealed fears and insecurities when faced with diving from height or swimming in deep water. Conversely, those who seemed timid or unremarkable in classroom settings occasionally demonstrated unexpected grace and power when moving through the aquatic environment. The cultural significance of swimming at Riverside High extended beyond athletic achievement to encompass broader themes of courage, perseverance, and the willingness to be seen in vulnerable moments. The pool had witnessed triumphs and humiliations that became part of the school's collective memory, creating legends and cautionary tales that influenced how students approached both the physical space and the social dynamics surrounding it. These stories shaped expectations and behaviors, establishing precedents for how conflicts were resolved and hierarchies maintained. For Maya, understanding these dynamics had become essential to navigating her new environment successfully. Her years of martial arts training had taught her to assess situations quickly and accurately, identifying potential threats while avoiding unnecessary confrontation. The pool complex at Riverside High represented a particularly complex challenge because it combined her strongest physical abilities with her most vulnerable social position, creating circumstances that would test every lesson Uncle Tommy had taught her about strength, wisdom, and the responsibility that came with possessing skills that others lacked. Maya Chen had perfected the art of strategic invisibility through years of practice across multiple schools, understanding that the first impression she created would determine whether her remaining time at Riverside High would be peaceful or problematic. Her approach was methodical and deliberate, crafted from hard-won experience with the unpredictable social ecosystems that govern teenage life. She dressed in unremarkable clothing that neither stood out for its style nor drew attention for its lack thereof, choosing muted colors and simple cuts that allowed her to blend seamlessly into the background of hallway crowds and classroom settings. Her daily routine followed patterns designed to minimize unwanted interactions while maximizing her ability to observe and understand the complex relationships that shaped her new environment. Maya arrived at school precisely 10 minutes before the first bell, timing that allowed her to navigate to her locker and first-period classroom without encountering the large groups of students whose morning gatherings often included the kind of loud conversations and dramatic interactions that drew administrative attention. She had learned that being present during these moments, even as a passive observer, could sometimes result in guilt by association when conflicts inevitably arose. During lunch periods, Maya found refuge in the library, where the enforced quiet created a sanctuary from the social pressures that dominated the cafeteria and outdoor eating areas. Her choice of seating positioned her near windows that offered views of the courtyard, allowing her to continue her careful study of social dynamics while appearing to focus on homework or reading. This vantage point had provided valuable intelligence about which groups commanded respect, which students moved freely between different social circles, and most importantly, which individuals seemed to take particular pleasure in targeting those they perceived as vulnerable or different. Teachers had begun to notice Maya for all the right reasons, recognizing her as the kind of student who completed assignments thoroughly, participated thoughtfully when called upon, and never created disruptions that interfered with their lesson plans. Ms. Rodriguez, her homeroom teacher, had made several attempts to encourage Maya to join extracurricular activities or social groups, sensing that the quiet new student possessed both intelligence and character that could benefit from broader engagement with school life. These well-meaning suggestions were politely deflected, with explanations about needing to focus on academics while adjusting to yet another new environment. The academic transition had been remarkably smooth, as Maya had developed efficient strategies for quickly assessing each teacher's expectations and adapting her approach accordingly. Her years of moving between schools had taught her to identify the unwritten rules that govern different classroom cultures, from understanding which instructors valued creative thinking over strict adherence to guidelines, to recognizing those who prioritized participation over perfect test scores. This adaptability had earned her consistently strong grades and positive relationships with faculty members who appreciated students who made their jobs easier rather than more difficult. What her classmates and teachers could not see was the careful calculation behind every interaction Maya had at Riverside High. Her seemingly natural tendency toward quiet observation was actually the result of systematic training in situational awareness that Uncle Tommy had incorporated into her martial arts education. She had learned to assess potential threats not just in formal sparring situations, but in everyday environments where conflicts could arise with little warning. This heightened alertness allowed her to identify brewing tensions, escape routes, and the subtle power dynamics that often preceded more obvious confrontations. Her physical appearance contributed significantly to the misconceptions that surrounded her true capabilities. At 5 feet 4 inches with a slender build that concealed the dense muscle developed through years of intensive training, Maya looked like countless other teenage girls navigating the challenges of high school life. Her dark hair was typically pulled back in simple styles that kept it away from her face during physical activities, while her clothing choices emphasized comfort and functionality over fashion statements that might draw unwanted attention. The careful conditioning that had transformed her body into a precision estimate remained completely hidden beneath this unremarkable exterior. Years of pad work had developed devastating power in her hands and feet, while countless hours of sparring had honed reflexes that could respond to threats faster than most people could consciously recognize them. The flexibility and balance required for advanced Muay Thai techniques had created an economy of movement that casual observers might mistake for natural grace rather than the result of disciplined training. Maya's voice carried the slight hesitation of someone still adjusting to new surroundings, though this apparent uncertainty masked a sharp analytical mind that was constantly processing information about her environment and the people within it. She had learned to ask questions that encouraged others to talk about themselves, deflecting curiosity about her background while gathering intelligence about the social landscape she needed to navigate. This technique had proven particularly effective with other students, who often interpreted her interest in their lives as admiration rather than strategic information gathering. Her backpack contained the typical supplies of any serious student, but tucked discreetly among textbooks and binders were items that revealed aspects of her life that remained invisible to casual observation. A small notebook filled with training schedules and technique reminders from Uncle Tommy, energy supplements that supported her continued conditioning routine, and photographs from previous schools that documented friendships formed and left behind during her family's frequent relocations. The loneliness that accompanied each new beginning had become a familiar companion, though Maya had learned to view these periods of social isolation as opportunities rather than punishments. Starting fresh meant freedom from previous mistakes or misunderstandings, but it also meant rebuilding the careful network of relationships that made daily life comfortable and secure. She had developed realistic expectations about how long this process typically required, understanding that genuine friendships could not be rushed, but also recognizing the importance of identifying allies who could provide support if situations became difficult. Her previous experiences had taught her that the students most likely to become problems were often those who seemed most friendly during initial encounters. Predators typically approached new students with offers of inclusion and acceptance, using kindness as a tool for identifying vulnerabilities that could be exploited later. Maya had learned to distinguish between authentic warmth and strategic manipulation, though this knowledge sometimes made her overly cautious about accepting genuine overtures of friendship from classmates who meant no harm. The contrast between her public persona and private reality had become so complete that Maya sometimes felt like she was living parallel lives that never quite intersected. At school, she was the quiet transfer student who kept to herself and caused no trouble. In her aunt and uncle's garage each evening, she transformed into a focused athlete whose strikes could break boards and whose conditioning routine would challenge many adult fighters. This compartmentalization felt necessary for survival, but it also created a sense of disconnection that made forming authentic relationships increasingly difficult. Her keen observations had already identified Brittany Parker as someone to avoid whenever possible, recognizing the particular combination of confidence, cruelty, and social power that created dangerous situations for students who drew the wrong kind of attention. Maya had witnessed enough interactions around the pool complex to understand that challenging Brittany's authority, even inadvertently, could result in the kind of targeted harassment that made school life miserable. Her plan was simple: maintain distance, avoid situations that might showcase abilities that could be perceived as threatening, and wait for the natural evolution of social dynamics to create opportunities for safer integration into the broader student community. What Maya could not have anticipated was how quickly circumstances beyond her control would force her into exactly the kind of high-visibility situation she had spent weeks carefully avoiding. Brittany Parker commanded attention the moment she entered any room, not through dramatic gestures or loud proclamations, but through the quiet confidence of someone who had never questioned her right to occupy center stage. At 18, she possessed the kind of natural athleticism that made competitive swimming look effortless, combined with the social intelligence that had allowed her to build and maintain power structures that extended far beyond the pool deck. Her platinum blonde hair, professionally maintained at the most expensive salon in Ocean View, caught light in ways that seemed almost engineered for maximum impact, while her designer athletic wear served as a daily reminder of the financial resources that supported her lifestyle and ambitions. The Parker family name carried significant weight throughout the Ocean View community, built on 3 generations of successful real estate development that had shaped much of the coastal area's most desirable neighborhoods. Brittany's parents, Richard and Catherine Parker, had inherited a modest agency from Catherine's father and transformed it into the dominant force in luxury property sales throughout the region. Their success had provided Brittany with advantages that extended far beyond material possessions, creating a network of influential connections that could open doors and smooth obstacles throughout her academic and athletic career. From an early age, Brittany had absorbed her parents' understanding that success required not just talent and effort, but strategic thinking about relationships, reputation, and the careful cultivation of image. Family dinner conversations frequently centered on negotiations, market positioning, and the psychology of influence, providing her with sophisticated insights into human motivation that most teenagers never encountered. These lessons had proven remarkably applicable to high school social dynamics, where understanding what people wanted and how to provide or withhold it had made her virtually unstoppable in achieving her goals. Her swimming career had begun at age 6 with private lessons at an exclusive country club, progressing through increasingly competitive programs that had taught her to view every pool as a battlefield, where victory required both physical preparation and mental dominance. By middle school, she was breaking records and collecting trophies that established her identity as someone destined for athletic greatness. The validation that came from these achievements had become addictive, creating a need for constant recognition that could not be satisfied through individual accomplishments alone. The transition to high school had presented new challenges as Brittany encountered swimmers from other programs whose abilities matched or occasionally exceeded her own. Rather than responding with increased training intensity alone, she had recognized that success in this environment would require establishing social dominance that could supplement and protect her athletic achievements. The popularity and influence she gained through strategic relationship building served as insurance against the possibility that someone else might eventually challenge her position as the team's undisputed star. Madison Torres had become Brittany's closest ally through a combination of genuine athletic ability and careful political maneuvering that demonstrated her value as more than just a follower. Madison's family had immigrated from Mexico when she was 7 years old, bringing dreams of educational and economic opportunities that had driven both parents to work multiple jobs while maintaining unwavering expectations for their daughter's academic and extracurricular success. Swimming had provided Madison with a pathway to scholarship possibilities that could transform her family's circumstances, making her alliance with Brittany as much about survival as social advancement. The friendship between Brittany and Madison had developed during their sophomore year, when Madison's times and distance events had begun attracting attention from college recruiters. Rather than viewing this development as a threat, Brittany had recognized an opportunity to strengthen her own position by aligning herself with another athlete whose success could enhance the team's overall reputation. Madison's gratitude for this support had evolved into fierce loyalty that made her willing to undertake tasks that allowed Brittany to maintain clean hands while ensuring that potential rivals understood the consequences of challenging established hierarchies. Madison's role within their group required constant navigation between her personal values and the actions necessary to maintain her position. Her parents had raised her with strong principles about treating others with respect and working hard for achievements rather than undermining competitors. But the realities of competitive swimming and high school politics had forced her to compromise these ideals in ways that sometimes kept her awake at night. The internal conflict this created was manageable only because the alternative seemed to be losing everything her family had sacrificed to achieve. Ashley Kim represented the newest addition to their inner circle, her recruitment motivated primarily by Brittany's recognition that maintaining power required constant expansion of influence and the strategic inclusion of students who could provide access to different social networks. Ashley's parents were successful technology professionals who had moved to Ocean View specifically for the school district's reputation, bringing with them expectations for their daughter's achievement that matched their own professional standards. Ashley's inclusion in Brittany's group had elevated her status dramatically, but it had also placed her in situations that tested her comfort level and moral boundaries. The dynamic between the three girls functioned like a carefully choreographed performance, where each member understood her role and responsibilities without requiring explicit direction. Brittany served as the visionary leader whose ideas and strategies guided their collective actions, while Madison provided the tactical intelligence and operational support necessary to implement these plans effectively. Ashley's primary function was to serve as the group's interface with students outside their immediate circle, using her newcomer status and apparent innocence to gather information and execute approaches that might seem suspicious coming from the more established members. Their methods of maintaining dominance had evolved over time, from crude intimidation tactics to sophisticated psychological manipulation that rarely left evidence of wrongdoing. They had learned to identify students' insecurities and exploit them through carefully planned campaigns that appeared accidental or coincidental to outside observers. A careless comment about someone's appearance, strategic exclusion from social events, or the spread of embarrassing information could achieve the same results as more obvious forms of harassment while maintaining plausible deniability if questioned by adults. The pool complex served as their primary domain, where their athletic credentials provided legitimate authority that could be extended into less official forms of control. They had established unwritten rules about everything from lane assignments during open swim periods to which students were welcome in the spectator areas during practice sessions. Violations of these invisible boundaries were met with consequences that escalated systematically until the offender either conformed to expectations or found themselves so uncomfortable that they avoided the area entirely. Their success in controlling this environment had created a feedback loop where other students actively sought their approval rather than simply avoiding their disapproval. Team members who wanted optimal training opportunities, students hoping to use pool facilities for recreation, and even some faculty members had learned to consider Brittany's preferences when making decisions about scheduling and resource allocation. This influence extended beyond the athletic complex as their opinions about fashion, social events, and acceptable behavior spread throughout the broader student population. The careful balance they had achieved required constant maintenance and vigilance against threats that could emerge from unexpected directions. New students represented particular challenges because they had not yet learned the established protocols and might accidentally or intentionally disrupt systems that had taken years to develop. Transfer students with athletic ability posed even greater risks because they could potentially challenge both the social and competitive foundations of Brittany's power structure. The arrival of Maya Chen had initially appeared manageable through their standard procedures for integrating new students into existing hierarchies. Her apparent shyness and tendency towards social invisibility suggested someone who would naturally defer to established authority without requiring active management. However, the swimming unit in physical education class had revealed capabilities that transformed Maya from a non-threat into someone requiring immediate and decisive action to prevent her from becoming a problem that could undermine everything they had worked to achieve. Their response would need to be swift, public, and decisive enough to discourage any other students from viewing Maya's abilities as inspiration for their own challenges to the established order. The pool would once again serve as their theater, but this time the performance would need to accomplish multiple objectives simultaneously, neutralizing a potential threat, reinforcing their authority, and sending a clear message about the consequences of disrupting their carefully constructed world. The revelation of Maya's swimming abilities during Coach Williams' mandatory PE assessment had been an accident of circumstance rather than any deliberate display of skill. The swimming unit had been scheduled during the 4th week of October, when the indoor pool provided relief from the increasingly cool autumn weather that made outdoor activities less appealing for students accustomed to California's year-round warmth. Maya had hoped that her careful strategy of maintaining average performance would allow her to complete the required laps without drawing attention, but years of disciplined physical conditioning had made mediocrity nearly impossible to achieve convincingly. Uncle Tommy Chen's training philosophy extended far beyond the traditional boundaries of martial arts, encompassing a holistic approach to physical and mental development that had transformed every aspect of Maya's capabilities. Swimming had been incorporated into her routine not for its own sake, but because the water provided resistance training that could not be replicated through land-based exercises alone. The breathing control required for extended underwater work directly supported the cardiovascular demands of intense sparring sessions, while the full-body coordination needed for efficient swimming strokes enhanced the fluid movement patterns that characterized advanced Muay Thai techniques. The gym in San Diego, where Maya had trained since age 12, occupied a converted warehouse in an industrial district where the rent was affordable and the clientele was serious about their commitment to martial arts rather than casual fitness. Uncle Tommy had established his school there after retiring from professional competition, bringing with him knowledge gained from training camps in Thailand, where the ancient art was practiced with a purity and intensity that had been diluted in many commercial American establishments. The facility contained minimal amenities beyond the essential equipment needed for authentic training. Heavy bags suspended, sparring sessions taught lessons that could never be learned through solo drills. Uncle Tommy's own journey to martial arts mastery had begun during his youth in Bangkok, where poverty had made fighting a potential pathway out of circumstances that offered few alternatives for advancement. His natural talent had been recognized by trainers who understood that successful fighters required not just physical gifts but the mental discipline to endure years of brutal preparation that broke most candidates before they reached professional levels. The nickname Silent Thunder had been earned through his fighting style, which emphasized patience and precision over the aggressive showmanship that excited crowds but often led to tactical mistakes that experienced opponents could exploit. His transition from active competition to teaching had been motivated by a desire to share the life-changing principles he had discovered through martial arts, particularly with young people who might benefit from the confidence and self-discipline that proper training could provide. When Maya's parents had approached him about helping their daughter deal with bullying at her elementary school, Uncle Tommy had immediately recognized both the opportunity and the responsibility involved in training someone so young. His acceptance had come with conditions that reflected his understanding of the serious commitment required from both student and instructor. The training regimen that Uncle Tommy designed for Maya had been carefully calibrated to her age and development, beginning with basic conditioning exercises that built foundation strength while teaching proper movement patterns that would support more advanced techniques as she matured. The early months had focused primarily on flexibility, balance, and breathing control, essential elements that many students rushed through in their eagerness to learn striking combinations, but which ultimately determined the ceiling of achievement possible in later years. Maya's willingness to embrace these fundamentals had demonstrated the patience and humility that Uncle Tommy considered prerequisites for serious martial arts study. As Maya's physical capabilities developed, Uncle Tommy had gradually introduced more sophisticated training methods that challenged both her athletic abilities and her mental discipline. Pad work sessions required precise timing and explosive power delivery, while maintaining perfect form under increasing fatigue, developing the neuromuscular coordination that allowed advanced practitioners to generate devastating force through seemingly effortless movements. Sparring exercises taught distance management, defensive positioning, and the split-second decision-making that determined success or failure when facing opponents whose intentions were genuinely hostile. The philosophical education that accompanied Maya's physical training had been equally rigorous and arguably more important for her long-term development. Uncle Tommy had shared stories from his own competitive career that illustrated the difference between fighters who possessed technical skill alone and those who understood the deeper principles that governed combat effectiveness. The most successful practitioners, he explained, were those who could remain calm under extreme pressure, who could read their opponent's intentions before they were fully formed, and who possessed the wisdom to know when fighting was necessary and when it represented a failure of better alternatives. The concept of soft power had been central to Uncle Tommy's teaching methodology, demonstrating how apparent gentleness could be more effective than obvious aggression in achieving desired outcomes. He had taught Maya to recognize that the loudest, most intimidating opponents were often compensating for fundamental insecurities, while truly dangerous individuals typically moved with quiet confidence that required no external validation. This understanding had proven applicable far beyond martial arts contexts, helping Maya navigate social situations where emotional intelligence was more valuable than physical capability. Maya's swimming technique had been refined through this same lens of efficiency and purpose, with Uncle Tommy explaining how the principles of leverage and timing that governed effective striking also applied to moving through water with maximum speed and minimum energy expenditure. The breathing patterns developed through martial arts meditation had enhanced her underwater endurance significantly, while the core strength and hip flexibility required for advanced kicks had translated directly into powerful swimming strokes that propelled her through the water with surprising speed. The accident that revealed these capabilities to her Riverside High classmates had occurred during the final assessment swim that Coach Williams used to determine grades and identify students with potential for competitive programs. Maya had calculated that finishing in the middle of the pack would satisfy academic requirements without attracting unwanted attention, but her body had responded to the familiar environment of competitive swimming with muscle memory developed through thousands of training sessions. The fluid stroke mechanics and efficient breathing patterns that she had intended to suppress had emerged naturally once she entered the water, carrying her to the pool's far end with a speed and grace that drew immediate notice from both the instructor and observing students. Coach Williams had been conducting similar assessments for over 15 years, developing an experienced eye for identifying natural talent among students whose previous aquatic experience varied dramatically. Maya's performance had stood out not just for its speed, but for the technical proficiency that typically required years of formal coaching to achieve. Her streamlined body position, precise stroke timing, and controlled breathing indicated someone with extensive background in competitive swimming, contradicting the information on her enrollment forms that listed no previous athletic participation at Riverside High. The coach's enthusiasm for discovering potential new talent had overcome his usual discretion about drawing attention to individual students during group assessments. His loud commentary about Maya's technique had carried clearly across the pool deck, reaching the ears of teammates who were using the adjacent lanes for their own training session. The timing had been particularly unfortunate, as Brittany Parker and her core group had been present to witness Maya's unexpected display of abilities that directly challenged their assumptions about the quiet transfer student they had previously dismissed as irrelevant to their concerns. Brittany's immediate recognition of the threat that Maya represented had been based on years of experience in competitive environments where new talent could disrupt established hierarchies with devastating speed. She had witnessed the arrival of transfer students at previous schools whose abilities had quickly elevated them to starting positions on teams where current members had expected to compete for championships and scholarship opportunities. The possibility that Maya might possess similar potential had triggered Brittany's strategic thinking about how to address this challenge before it could develop into a more serious problem. The conversation that evening between Brittany, Madison, and Ashley had taken place in the Parker family's expansive living room, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the manicured backyard that featured a regulation-sized swimming pool equipped with professional timing equipment. The setting had provided an appropriate backdrop for planning that would determine how they responded to what Brittany characterized as an unexpected threat to their carefully constructed dominance at Riverside High. The discussion had been conducted with the same methodical approach that characterized all of their strategic planning, beginning with information gathering and proceeding through option evaluation to the selection of tactics that would achieve their objectives with minimal risk of adult intervention. Madison had been assigned to gather additional intelligence about Maya's background, using her access to student records through her volunteer position in the main office to research transfer documentation and previous school attendance. The information she had uncovered had raised additional concerns about Maya's potential impact on their established order, as her academic records indicated consistent high achievement that could make her attractive to teachers and administrators looking for students to highlight in school promotional materials. The combination of apparent academic excellence and unexpected athletic ability created a profile that Brittany recognized as particularly dangerous to their current status. Ashley's role in the planning process had focused on identifying opportunities for implementing whatever response strategy they ultimately decided to pursue. Her analysis of Maya's daily routines had revealed predictable patterns that could be exploited to create situations where their intervention would appear natural rather than obviously orchestrated. The upcoming informal swimming party that several students had organized for the following Friday afternoon had emerged as an ideal venue for the kind of public demonstration that would establish clear boundaries while providing plausible deniability about their intentions. The plan that emerged from their discussions had been elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential effectiveness. Maya would be invited to join the pool party through carefully orchestrated peer pressure that would make refusal seem antisocial and suspicious. Once present, she would be encouraged to demonstrate the swimming abilities that had attracted Coach Williams' attention, creating opportunities for accidents that could humble her, while appearing to result from natural causes rather than deliberate sabotage. The ultimate goal was not simply to embarrass Maya, but to establish psychological dominance that would prevent her from becoming a long-term problem for their group's continued success. The implementation of this strategy had required careful coordination among multiple participants, as the appearance of spontaneity was essential for avoiding administrative scrutiny that could result in serious consequences for everyone involved. Brittany had used her influence among the broader student population to ensure strong attendance at the pool party, creating an audience large enough that Maya's humiliation would become common knowledge throughout the school within hours of its occurrence. Madison had volunteered to serve as the primary recruiter for Maya's participation, using her reputation as a serious student to make the invitation seem genuine rather than predatory. Ashley's assignment had been the most technically demanding, requiring her to create circumstances that would place Maya in vulnerable positions, while maintaining her own apparent innocence about any negative outcomes that might result. Her recent certification as a lifeguard had provided both the authority and the access necessary to manipulate pool equipment and safety protocols in ways that could create dangerous situations for unsuspecting swimmers. The psychological pressure of being responsible for others' safety would make it difficult for Maya to decline participation in activities that Ashley suggested, while her official position would make any subsequent accusations about deliberate endangerment extremely difficult to prove. The Friday afternoon that had been selected for their operation had arrived with the kind of perfect California weather that made outdoor activities irresistible to teenagers looking for relief from academic pressures and social tensions that characterized the end of each school week. The pool complex had been officially closed for routine maintenance, but Brittany's family connections with school board members had secured permission for the informal gathering that would serve as cover for their more specific objectives. The combination of administrative approval and perfect conditions had attracted nearly 40 students whose presence would provide both the audience and the chaos necessary for their plan to succeed. Maya's initial reluctance to attend had been overcome through a carefully orchestrated campaign of social pressure that had made her refusal seem ungrateful and antisocial to classmates who were genuinely trying to include her in group activities. Emma Walsh, a shy sophomore who had been struggling to find her own place within the school's social ecosystem, had been particularly effective in encouraging Maya's participation because her invitation carried no obvious ulterior motives. Emma's genuine desire to make friends with someone who seemed similarly isolated had provided perfect cover for the more calculated interests that were driving the invitation. The pool party had begun innocuously enough, with students arriving in small groups throughout the early afternoon and settling into the relaxed social patterns that characterized such gatherings. The presence of multiple chaperones had ensured appropriate supervision while creating the kind of structured environment where planned activities could be introduced without seeming forced or artificial. Brittany had positioned herself as the natural coordinator of group activities, using her established leadership role to guide the afternoon's progression toward the climactic confrontation that would serve her strategic objectives. The swimming competitions that began as informal races between friends had gradually evolved into more organized contests that drew increasing attention from spectators and participants alike. Maya had successfully avoided the early events by volunteering to serve as a timekeeper and judge, a role that allowed her to remain involved without showcasing the abilities that had already attracted unwanted notice. However, the progressive escalation of competitive intensity had made her continued avoidance increasingly conspicuous to observers who were beginning to question why someone with obvious swimming talent was refusing to participate. The transition from voluntary participation to social coercion had been managed with subtle precision that reflected years of experience in manipulating group dynamics to achieve desired outcomes. Comments about fairness and inclusivity had been strategically deployed to make Maya's continued refusal seem selfish and antisocial, while direct challenges to her courage and school spirit had created emotional pressure that was difficult to resist without appearing weak or afraid. The cumulative effect had been to transform what had begun as optional entertainment into a situation where participation had become essentially mandatory for anyone hoping to maintain social standing among their peers. Maya's eventual agreement to participate in the swimming contests had been extracted through this combination of peer pressure and strategic manipulation. But her consent had been limited to the relatively safe competition of individual races against opponents whose abilities she could assess and counter without revealing the full extent of her own capabilities. The escalation to more dangerous activities had required additional pressure tactics that pushed the boundaries of what could be justified as friendly encouragement versus deliberate harassment designed to create opportunities for the humiliation that was their ultimate objective. The suggestion for diving competitions had emerged from Ashley's position as the certified lifeguard, whose responsibility for safety made her recommendations difficult to question or refuse. Her proposal for increasingly challenging dives from greater heights had been presented as a natural progression of competitive activities that would test courage as well as skill, appealing to the adolescent psychology that viewed backing down from physical challenges as tantamount to admitting cowardice. The presence of spectators had amplified this pressure significantly, creating an audience whose expectations made retreat extremely difficult for anyone hoping to maintain social credibility. Maya's agreement to participate in the diving competition had been secured through this combination of social pressure and safety assurances that made refusals seem both cowardly and antisocial. However, her insistence on starting with lower heights and gradually progressing to more challenging levels had interfered with the timeline that Brittany had established for their operation. The need to accelerate Maya's progression to vulnerable positions had required more direct intervention that increased the risk of their true intentions, becoming obvious to adult supervisors whose presence was intended to prevent exactly the kind of dangerous behavior they were planning to encourage. The manipulation of diving board access and safety equipment had been accomplished through Ashley's authority as the designated lifeguard, whose recommendations about proper technique and safety protocols carried official weight that made them difficult to challenge. Her suggestion that Maya demonstrate her abilities from the highest diving platform had been couched in terms of competitive fairness and proper skill assessment, making it appear that she was simply ensuring that all participants had equal opportunities to showcase their talents. The technical complexity of executing safe dives from such heights had created multiple opportunities for accidents that could be attributed to inexperience rather than deliberate sabotage. The moment of crisis had arrived when Maya had finally agreed to attempt a dive from the platform that would place her in the most vulnerable position relative to the water below and the spectators surrounding the pool deck. The combination of height, distance, and crowd pressure had created exactly the circumstances that Brittany had envisioned for the decisive demonstration that would establish clear boundaries about challenging established hierarchies at Riverside High. However, the execution of their plan had required split-second timing and precise coordination that left little room for the unexpected variables that were about to transform their carefully orchestrated harassment into something far more dangerous and consequential. The dive itself had been executed with the technical proficiency that characterized all of Maya's athletic performances, her body maintaining perfect form as she descended toward the water with the controlled grace that years of martial arts training had developed. However, the impact with the surface had been disrupted by equipment that had been subtly repositioned to create hazardous conditions that would challenge even experienced divers attempting to navigate safely to the pool's edge. The resulting disorientation and underwater chaos had created exactly the kind of dangerous situation that Brittany had intended to exploit for maximum psychological impact on both Maya and the watching audience. What none of the conspirators had anticipated was how quickly the simulated emergency would escalate into genuine life-threatening circumstances that exceeded their ability to control or reverse. The equipment malfunctions and positioning errors that had been intended to create momentary panic and embarrassment had instead generated underwater obstacles that prevented Maya from surfacing as expected, transforming their harassment into an actual drowning situation that required immediate intervention to prevent serious injury or death. The transition from deliberate cruelty to accidental emergency had occurred so rapidly that none of the participants had time to adjust their roles or responses appropriately. Ashley's position as the official lifeguard had suddenly placed her in the impossible situation of being responsible for rescuing someone whose endangerment she had helped create, while her own involvement in the setup made it difficult for her to respond with the immediate action that genuine emergencies required. The conflict between her official responsibilities and her complicity in creating the dangerous situation had paralyzed her decision-making at the moment when quick action was most critical, creating a delay that allowed the emergency to develop beyond the point where simple intervention could easily resolve it. The crowd of student spectators had initially responded to the developing crisis with the kind of excited attention that they might show to dramatic entertainment, not immediately recognizing that what they were witnessing had transitioned from planned humiliation to genuine emergency. The gradual realization that Maya was actually in serious trouble had created a wave of panic among observers, whose experience with water safety was limited to basic swimming lessons that had not prepared them for responding to real emergencies. The chaos and confusion that resulted had made coordinated rescue efforts nearly impossible, while creating additional hazards for anyone attempting to provide assistance. Maya's own response to the underwater emergency had been shaped by years of training that had prepared her for exactly the kind of life-threatening situations that most people never encountered outside of carefully controlled environments. The breath control techniques that Uncle Tommy had taught her for managing stress and conserving energy during extended sparring sessions had proven directly applicable to underwater emergencies, where panic could quickly exhaust available oxygen and lead to fatal mistakes. Her ability to remain calm while assessing options and implementing solutions had been the crucial factor that prevented the situation from developing into the tragedy that it had briefly threatened to become. The martial arts training that had remained hidden throughout her time at Riverside High had suddenly become relevant in ways that no one could have predicted or prepared for. The core strength and flexibility that enabled her to generate devastating striking power had also provided the physical capabilities necessary for underwater maneuvering in restricted spaces where normal swimming techniques were ineffective. The mental discipline that allowed her to maintain focus during intense sparring sessions had enabled her to think clearly and systematically about escape options, while fighting the natural panic responses that overwhelmed most people in similar circumstances. However, the most crucial element of Maya's response had not been her physical capabilities or her mental preparation, but the ethical framework that Uncle Tommy had insisted was inseparable from true martial arts mastery. The principles of protection and service that had been emphasized throughout her training had created an automatic response pattern that prioritized others' safety over her own interests, even when those others had created the dangerous situation that threatened her life. This philosophical foundation had guided her actions in ways that purely technical training could never have achieved. The realization that Brittany was also in serious trouble had occurred during Maya's own struggle to reach the surface safely, when she had observed the other girls' distressed movements and recognized the signs of genuine drowning that most people only encountered in safety training videos. The choice between focusing on her own escape and diverting energy to assist someone who had deliberately endangered her had presented exactly the kind of moral test that Uncle Tommy had described during their philosophical discussions about the responsibilities that came with possessing superior physical capabilities. Maya's decision to prioritize Brittany's safety over her own convenience had been instantaneous and automatic, reflecting years of training that had made protective responses more natural than self-preservation instincts. The rescue operation that followed had required every aspect of Maya's training and preparation, from the breath control that allowed her to remain underwater longer than normal physiology would permit, to the strategic thinking that enabled her to identify and implement solutions that saved both their lives. The technical execution had involved underwater maneuvering that showcased the body control and spatial awareness that martial arts training had developed, while the tactical planning had demonstrated the rapid decision-making capabilities that sparring sessions had refined through countless repetitions of high-pressure scenarios. The moment when both girls had broken the surface safely had been witnessed by the entire gathered crowd, whose stunned silence reflected their recognition that they had just observed something extraordinary that challenged their assumptions about both Maya's capabilities and Brittany's vulnerability. The contrast between Maya's calm competence and Brittany's obvious distress had created a tableau that reversed every expectation about their relative positions within the school's social hierarchy, demonstrating that real strength had nothing to do with popularity or social influence, and everything to do with character and capability when circumstances demanded genuine leadership. The immediate aftermath of the rescue had been characterized by a chaos of activity as adult supervisors arrived to assess the situation and ensure that both girls received appropriate medical attention. The questions about how the emergency had developed and who was responsible for the equipment malfunctions that had created the dangerous conditions had been deflected by Maya's insistence that accidents happened and that the important thing was ensuring everyone's safety rather than assigning blame for circumstances that could have been caused by any number of factors. Her refusal to pursue the investigation that might have revealed the deliberate nature of what had occurred had demonstrated a maturity and forgiveness that left many observers questioning their own responses to conflict and adversity. Brittany's response to being rescued by someone she had intended to humiliate had been complicated by the combination of genuine gratitude for her life being saved and the psychological impact of having her assumptions about power and weakness completely overturned. The experience of being helpless while someone she had underestimated took control of a life-threatening situation had forced her to confront fundamental questions about her own values and the methods she had used to maintain social dominance. The recognition that Maya could have chosen to save herself while leaving Brittany to face the consequences of the dangerous situation that had resulted from their harassment plan had created a debt that could never be repaid through normal social interactions. The crowd of student witnesses had dispersed slowly, many staying to discuss what they had observed and to try to process the implications of seeing their established social order completely inverted through a demonstration of genuine courage and capability that had nothing to do with traditional markers of status or influence. The conversations that began on the pool deck that afternoon had continued in small groups throughout the weekend, as students attempted to reconcile what they had witnessed with their previous assumptions about strength, leadership, and the qualities that determined who deserved respect and admiration within their community. Maya's handling of the post-rescue interviews and discussions had continued to demonstrate the wisdom and maturity that had guided her response to the emergency itself. Her deflection of praise and her insistence that anyone would have done the same thing in similar circumstances had shown a humility that made her more rather than less impressive to observers who were accustomed to seeing athletic achievements celebrated with ego and self-promotion. The contrast between her genuine modesty and the calculated image management that characterized most social interactions at Riverside High had created additional respect for someone who seemed to possess confidence that required no external validation. The impact on Ashley had been perhaps the most profound of all the participants, as her role as the certified lifeguard had placed her in the position of being responsible for an emergency that she had helped create. The conflict between her official duties and her participation in the harassment plan had forced her to confront the ethical implications of allowing peer pressure to override her own moral judgment about right and wrong. The knowledge that her failure to act quickly during the crisis had nearly resulted in serious injury or death for both Maya and Brittany had created a burden of guilt that would influence her decisions and relationships for years to come. The transformation in school dynamics that began that Friday afternoon had continued to evolve throughout the following weeks, as the story of Maya's rescue spread through the student population and beyond into the broader Ocean View community. The details had been embellished and modified through countless retellings, but the core message had remained consistent. The quiet transfer student who had seemed so unremarkable had proven herself to be someone with both exceptional capabilities and extraordinary character when circumstances had demanded genuine leadership and courage. Coach Williams had been among the first faculty members to recognize the broader implications of what had occurred, understanding that Maya's response to the emergency had demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership and decision-making ability that competitive programs sought in their most valued athletes. His conversations with Maya about joining the swim team had been respectful of her apparent reluctance to pursue formal athletic participation, while making clear that her abilities and character would be welcomed whenever she decided to become more involved in school activities. The coach's approach had reflected his understanding that forcing talented students into programs they were not ready to embrace typically produced negative results for everyone involved. The peer mediation program that had been established at Maya's suggestion had grown out of her recognition that the underlying conflicts that had led to the pool incident were symptomatic of broader communication problems that affected many students' experiences at Riverside High. Her proposal for structured opportunities to address disagreements before they escalated into harassment or violence had been enthusiastically supported by administrators who had been looking for proactive approaches to student conflict resolution. The program's success had exceeded all expectations, creating a model that other schools throughout the district had begun to study and adapt for their own communities. Maya's relationship with Brittany had evolved slowly from the awkward gratitude of the immediate aftermath towards something approaching genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared recognition of lessons learned through their confrontation. Brittany's willingness to acknowledge her role in creating the dangerous situation had demonstrated a capacity for growth and self-reflection that few observers had expected from someone so accustomed to having her way in all circumstances. Their collaboration in developing anti-bullying initiatives had provided a powerful example of how former adversaries could work together to address the systemic problems that had brought them into conflict originally. The influence of Uncle Tommy's teachings had become more visible, as Maya had grown more comfortable sharing the philosophical principles that guided her decision-making with classmates who were struggling with their own choices about how to respond to various challenges and conflicts. The concepts of strength through restraint and leadership through service had resonated with many students who had been looking for alternatives to the competitive individualism that characterized much of their academic and social experience. The informal discussion groups that had formed around these ideas had provided safe spaces for exploring questions about character, responsibility, and the kind of people they wanted to become. The recognition that Maya received from community organizations and local media had been handled with the same humility and redirection toward broader principles that had characterized her response to the original incident. Her acceptance speeches and interviews had consistently emphasized the importance of treating others with respect and looking for opportunities to help rather than harm, deflecting personal credit while promoting the values that had guided her actions. The scholarship opportunities that had emerged from this recognition had provided her with options for continuing her education that would not have been available otherwise, demonstrating how character-based decisions could create unexpected benefits that extended far beyond their immediate circumstances. Madison's transformation had been gradual but profound, as her friendship with Maya had provided her with perspectives on competition and success that differed dramatically from the zero-sum thinking that had previously governed her approach to athletics and academics. The realization that helping others succeed could actually enhance rather than diminish her own opportunities had led to changes in her training methods and team interactions that had improved both her performance and her relationships with coaches and teammates. Her eventual recruitment by several Division I programs had validated the effectiveness of this more collaborative approach to achievement. The long-term impact on Riverside High's culture had been measurable through various indicators that demonstrated sustained improvement in student relationships and conflict resolution. The reduction in disciplinary incidents, the increase in participation in inclusive activities, and the improvement in school climate surveys had all reflected the influence of the peer mediation program and the broader philosophical shift toward mutual support rather than competitive hostility. The school's recognition as a model for positive student culture had attracted attention from educational researchers and policymakers who were seeking evidence-based approaches to improving adolescent social development. Years later, as Maya had progressed through college and into her career as a social worker specializing in youth development, she had continued to apply the lessons learned during that transformative afternoon at the Riverside High Pool. Her approach to working with young people had been informed by her understanding that apparent aggression often masked deeper insecurities that could be addressed through patient listening and genuine care. The techniques she had developed for helping teenagers resolve conflicts constructively had been based on the same principles of respect and empowerment that had guided her response to Brittany's harassment campaign. Brittany's own journey had taken her through competitive swimming in college and into a career in sports psychology, where she had worked with athletes struggling with the pressure and identity issues that had once driven her own problematic behavior. Her research into the psychological factors that influenced competitive performance had been informed by her personal experience with both the destructive and constructive uses of power in athletic environments. The intervention programs she had developed for addressing bullying in sports settings had been widely adopted and had helped countless young athletes avoid the mistakes that had nearly cost her much more than just social status. Ashley's path had led her into emergency medicine, where her guilt over the pool incident had motivated years of dedicated study and training that had equipped her to save lives rather than endanger them. Her expertise in water safety and drowning prevention had been shared through training programs that had educated thousands of lifeguards and swimming instructors about recognizing and responding to aquatic emergencies. The foundation she had established to provide water safety education in underserved communities had been funded partly through her own contributions and partly through support from others who had been inspired by her commitment to making amends for past mistakes. The ripple effects of that Friday afternoon had continued to spread through the Ocean View community and beyond, as the students who had witnessed Maya's response had carried the lessons they had learned into their own adult lives and relationships. The children they would eventually raise had been influenced by parents who understood the importance of character over competition, while the professional environments they had entered had been shaped by their commitment to treating colleagues with the same respect and consideration that Maya had demonstrated, even toward those who had tried to harm her. The pool at Riverside High had been renovated several years after the incident, with new safety equipment and monitoring systems that had been installed partly in response to the near tragedy that had occurred there. However, the more significant changes had been in the culture and expectations that governed how students interacted with each other and responded to conflicts that inevitably arose in any diverse community. The plaque that had been installed near the pool entrance had commemorated not the specific incident but the broader principle that strength was best demonstrated through protection and service rather than domination and control. Maya's return to Riverside High as a guest speaker during the 10th anniversary celebration of the peer mediation program had provided an opportunity to reflect on how much had changed since that afternoon when she had been forced to choose between her own safety and Brittany's life. The auditorium full of current students had listened with rapt attention as she had described the decision-making process that had guided her actions, emphasizing that heroism was not about possessing special abilities, but about making the right choices when circumstances demanded courage and selflessness. The questions they had asked had demonstrated their understanding that the principles she had lived by were accessible to anyone willing to prioritize others' well-being over their own convenience or safety. The documentary that had been produced about the transformation at Riverside High had featured interviews with many of the original participants, including Brittany, Madison, and Ashley, all of whom had spoken candidly about their roles in creating the crisis and the lessons they had learned from Maya's response. The film had been used in educational settings throughout the country to stimulate discussions about leadership, character development, and the ways that individual choices could influence entire communities. The awards it had received had been less important than the conversations it had generated among young people who were facing their own decisions about how to treat others and respond to conflicts. Uncle Tommy's influence had been acknowledged throughout these various recognition events and media coverage, with Maya consistently crediting her grandfather figure with providing the philosophical foundation that had made her response possible. The martial arts principles that had guided her training had been presented not as techniques for fighting, but as frameworks for living with integrity and purpose regardless of the challenges that life presented. The scholarship program that had been established in Uncle Tommy's name had provided opportunities for other young people to receive similar training and mentorship that could help them develop the character and capabilities needed to make positive differences in their own communities. The marriage between Maya and her college sweetheart had been followed by the establishment of a family that had been raised according to the same principles that had guided her response to crisis at Riverside High. Her children had grown up understanding that their privileges came with responsibilities to help others, and that true strength was demonstrated through kindness rather than force. The volunteer work they had performed together as a family had provided practical opportunities to apply these principles in real-world situations, where their actions could make meaningful differences in other people's lives. As Maya had aged and gained additional perspective on the events that had shaped her adolescence, she had come to understand that the pool incident had been significant, not because of its dramatic nature, but because it had provided a clear example of how individual choices could create positive change that extended far beyond their immediate circumstances. The decision to save Brittany rather than simply escape to safety had been guided by principles that applied equally to countless smaller decisions that people made every day about how to treat others and respond to difficulties. The legacy of that afternoon had been measured not in the recognition it had generated, but in the improved relationships and stronger communities that had resulted from people choosing to prioritize service over self-interest. The final chapter of this story had yet to be written, as the students who had been influenced by Maya's example had continued to spread these principles through their own families, careers, and communities. The teachers who had observed the transformation at Riverside High had carried similar approaches to other schools where they had worked, while the administrators who had supported the peer mediation program had implemented comparable initiatives in subsequent positions. The exponential growth of positive influence that had resulted from one person's decision to do the right thing under pressure had demonstrated the profound impact that character-based choices could have on the world. The pool at Riverside High had hosted thousands of swimmers in the decades since Maya's rescue of Brittany, but the lessons learned that Friday afternoon had continued to influence how students treated each other and responded to conflicts that arose in their shared spaces. The culture of mutual respect and support that had grown from that incident had been maintained through the consistent application of principles that recognized everyone's inherent worth and potential for positive contribution. The transformation had proven sustainable because it had been based on values that appealed to the best aspects of human nature, rather than systems that required constant enforcement or supervision. Maya's story had become part of the inspiration literature that guidance counselors shared with students who were struggling with their own decisions about how to respond to bullying, peer pressure, and the various challenges that characterized adolescent life. The message that had resonated most strongly with young readers had been that heroism was accessible to anyone willing to prioritize others' well-being over their own immediate interests, and that the most important battles were often fought not with physical force but with moral courage and principled decision-making. The impact of these discussions had been reflected in improved school climates and stronger communities throughout the regions where Maya's story had been shared. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.